Welcome to How to Be a Person, a podcast about life with me, your host, Giuliano Grimaudo. All right, Daniel, what's up, my friend?
Yeah, hey, I'm doing great, man. Juliana, how you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Thank you so much for coming on. Let's get to know each other a little bit. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about you?
Yeah, I'm an eccentric fella. I look like a jock, but I am quite the nerd on the inside, and I love the nitty gritty and the macro. From what's going down deep within us, down to the cell, or up to to the cosmos. And to me, that's the most interesting thing about life is that we went from one cell to 70 trillion. We all did it. We can't verbalize how we did it, but we did the process, right? You know what I mean? You
Yeah,
did it,
true.
I did it. And
True.
so that's part of being a scientist is discovering and understanding like, okay, I'm going to use this tool, this way of thinking in order to be able to describe what's going on, and I'm still in a state of awe because what the hell is going on? Like what on planet Earth do you really need to watch, the Netflix, the TV soap opera dramas when life itself right now is hurling at us like never before?
So true. So true. So would you describe yourself as a scientist then?
Yeah, that is the job description, right? I run a life science consultancy,
Okay.
and obviously there's you can get a more specified title, but the scientist is call it the day in and day out the work, which the people what I research is people. So people come to me and I connect them to call it the broader scope of what they're interested in, whether it's longevity or whether it's combating chronic disease. But then we take the N of one approach. I don't know if you're familiar with hearing N of one,
I'm not.
but in science you usually need an N of whatever, 3 minimum in order to get statistics to be like, okay, something's going on. But
Okay.
the work has been done where we have enough information on things to make call it connections, the correlations, so forth, the trends. And in making those trends, you have to exclude a bunch of outliers. Hey, you didn't fit this graph. I'm going to kick you out because I need to, you're messing up my graph. But now we got to take a step back and be like, okay, well, that outlier is a person. I can't just ignore it.
It
So
exists. Yeah, it's a great point. Like it's not like you can't just write it off like it didn't happen.
That's exactly it. And what happens when you're that guy on more than one of these metrics? And the reality is that every single person will be on some part different from others. And so you have to take the N of one approach. It's the one person experiment where you're taking instances across time to help you gather, okay, is this thing moving at all? Is it trending? And when I say any kind of measurement, right, the amount of measurements we can take is infinite. So which ones are useful? And that's quite the challenge to know the value of the right measurement at the right time. And so, the biggest hurdle given to biology is the inter-individual variation. That's just very fancy way of saying, hey, we're different from one another.
Yeah.
And the scope of it really is determinant of whether, for example, one person gets diarrhea while the other person gets constipated. But at least you're in the ballpark with talking about the right physiology, right function.
Gastrointestinal distress.
Right. I know that one's visceral. Everyone can understand that one. But and that's a big part is communicating in such a way where I'm not, I've noticed that there's a barrier to entry with talking about health when there shouldn't be. There just shouldn't. It's just everyone should have access to health and understanding, hey, why am I taking certain actions? And I've, been doing this for 15 years where I've come to a point where my belief, and I'll say this very articulated, my belief is that beliefs are what's getting in people's way of their own health. Right. So we know things and we believe in things, like, oh, my boss is going to kill me. He's going to be so pissed at this. Do you know that or do you believe that? Because those are two very different things. You don't believe in your parents. You know who your parents are. You know your parents, right?
Yeah.
But you'll see how very often we, even when in call it very scientific contexts, people get into state of beliefs. And one, for example, I overheard the other day, I was camping and like a nice thought, but someone brings Tim Hortons, right, which is a bunch of donuts to a group of cyclists, right?
Yeah.
They're like, oh, you need to load up on carbs in order to have energy for your bike ride. Like, okay, that's a very particular belief that's going to erode that person's metabolism, right? That you're just inhibiting their access to energy. And if people are like, oh, what is he talking about? That's carbs. It's good for you. No, carbs isn't some blanket word you can use for every single foodstuffs that has some, carbohydrate in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? That donut is going to absolutely make it a nightmare for you to access your fat stores. And so, yeah, it might give you a little bit of sugar,
Mm.
right? But it's also going to cause a downstream, not instantaneous, but if that's what your idea of what carbs are for, hey, my quick source of energy, you're going to have issues accessing your actual energy stores, the glycogen in your liver, the glycogen in your muscle, the actual fatty acids in your blood. So, that's a very easy example of someone has a belief that then leads them to age very poorly. And
Mm.
we are aging very, very poorly. I would say that we are the most unhealthy civilization that's ever existed on planet Earth.
Mm. It's not surprising. I mean, I was just talking to my wife the other day about how, like, you rewind not that far back, like literally not that far back, and food was just fuel. Like it wasn't something where you're like, oh, okay, like I this is something I have to enjoy. Whereas now, like when I eat something, like I have to enjoy it. If I don't enjoy it, it's like I'm not eating that thing. Like it's part of my enjoyment throughout the day. It's like part of what brings me pleasure throughout the day is eating, right? But like I said, you rewind not that far back, and it's like, bro, it's literally just you eat to survive. And I could see how eating for the sake of pleasure has resulted in all of these different, things being wrong with the food that we're eating, our habits around eating, and affecting the way, like you said, the way we age.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard to know when you say, hey, I'll rewind back. I think throughout human history, we've had every which way of call it of living, where you had societies, flourish, thrive, and be at a pinnacle where, hey, now I can start really playing around with cuisines I'm bringing to the table.
Mm.
Like the emperor's has his
Yeah.
chefs finally make some noodles or whatever, right? And inventing foods. And I do think that's been a bit of uh, like a lost art where our ancient men had a really good idea and understanding of what foods go together and what doesn't, what herbs, what spices, if are added, it help the food become more bioavailable, right? Help you absorb more
Mm.
nutrients in the food. And in today's day and age, we think eating healthy is just throwing a bunch of vegetables together. But even myself, who's been doing this for a long time, I'm constantly learning of interactions that don't go well together. Like, hey, if you have
Interesting.
raw carrots with things, raw carrots have an enzyme in it that destroys vitamin C and can convert other, call it, you know, compounds in their other raw vegetables that'll then make your stomach a little upset. So, hey, you got to blanch or boil your carrots, or you got to do something to your carrots. And when you look at these recipes that have been passed down, they have a really good understanding of how to do, call it a process
Mm.
that doesn't result into, hey, it's going to cause my stomach to have issues. And so a good example is, avocado and eggs. We think, oh, that's really healthy. I love avocado and eggs, but always notice how heavy it sits in my stomach. And then lo and behold, you read a publication or two and we're there. Even though science lags behind, call it a decade, 2 decades, sometimes even longer.
Sure.
Heck, the publications are there with case studies saying, okay, gentleman ate eggs and avocado for almost 2 years straight, ends up having stomach, gastric dysbiosis, like a stomach issue with digesting food.
Yeah.
And he's not eating, call it the bad processed,
Mm.
food that people are really pointing a finger to for a lot of the health concerns.
Yeah.
He's still eating healthy, quote unquote, but he's not eating in such a way that it's in tune with his body or the
Mm.
way that our physiology works. And I'm convinced this idea of carbs, fats, and proteins, they've done more harm than good. Because if a person thinks they know, they're not curious anymore. But when they don't
Mm.
know,
Yes.
then they keep asking
Oh
questions.
my gosh. Okay, first I just have to say like 100%. Like that is so for me like that's like my philosophy on life. Like as soon as you decide you know something, now you've stopped yourself from learning. And so like I 100% agree with you. Like I think it's important to take new information, but the problem is that like some people like when you take in the new information they go, "Oh, now this is the correct way." And then you're like, "Okay, but you realize that's what got you to this point, right?" Is that you thought you knew the right thing. It's like we of course we should take new information, but we have to view it just as that. It's new information and I'm still open to more. And so like I totally agree with you. Like it's very easy to put foods into certain categories based on the macro ratios when in reality that's just like one piece of the puzzle of what you're eating.
Yeah, absolutely. Rice is different from a piece of potato. Heck, potato from sweet potato is different. How your
Mm.
blood sugar responds and what you're getting from it. And you go down the list. Carbohydrates are extremely plentiful, And so what are we talking about, when we say those kind of broad categories? And, the notion is, if you understand those macronutrients, really understand, okay, this is the energy I can pull from the food, right? Because that's really what we're talking about when we talk about the big groups.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, protein doesn't even fall in that category, because, this is getting some heavy duty biochemistry, but ultimately we really use, for what we call quote unquote energy, carbs and fats, right?
Mm.
Those are two main systems. Now, proteins will come into the equation, but under circumstances that require further, call it, caveats, like you have to have cachexia, meaning like you're wasting away.
Mm.
Proteins come in. You have to be at a point where you aren't able to, you require more intermediate molecules, and so you need proteins to come in there to act as those intermediates to keep
Mm.
your metabolism running, right? If that's a little too specific, I apologize, but
No, it's
sometimes
okay. I appreciate it. I appreciate
yeah, it's hard enough to, for myself to understand. I've been studying it 12 to 15
it.
years, and I'm shocked when people come at like, oh, it's solved, I know this. I'm like, really? I stare at this daily, and I still have questions and,
Mm.
and puzzles
Yeah.
as to what parts are we missing. And so, the idea here that is, I think, really challenging for me too, is like, how do you get through to a person that, I would say, ignorance has seeped into their mindset,
Mm.
because those are the people that could use the most help, but you can't help the unwilling, right? They
Yeah.
can't be tell us. And what's the solution for that? What is that person? Just get, you live your life and, you know, get all the problems, and hopefully you learn your skin. One day you wake up like, hey, something's not right. My balanced diet is clearly not balanced, because, problems are showcasing.
Yeah.
What do you do for those folk? Do you
It's
have
a
an answer?
it's a good question. I don't know, man. No, see, this is the thing. Okay, so one thing I learned a while back was that like part of what motivates people is pain and pleasure, and that pain is a bigger motivator. And I think what ends up happening is like a lot of people, they don't make changes until the pain is so great that the pain of change is less than the pain of staying the same. Right? And so they go and they make those changes, and so it's kind of unfortunate, but to be honest, I think all of us are probably like that in some area of our life, right? Like even if we're like this with our health, it's like, well, maybe our relationships are like that too. It's like we're letting something, slide and letting something go that we are not aware of until the pain is too great. Um, but I do think I mean, yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. I wish I knew how to
No,
how
I,
to
I
do
do.
that to help those people.
No, I think you're right. You're saying the same, call it, mantra that kind of runs through my head, right? It is, we have to learn our own skin, and the smart people learn from others,
Mm.
right? And then you really can tell who's actually smart in this world, where they're navigating it without calling it too many scars that they have
Mm.
to go through, where they can foresee the pain and they can act ahead of time in order to be able to get the highs, that you have to work for, that are way more satisfaction than the momentary gratifications that we look for.
Sure.
And I think, from what I've seen, is that individuals that have very strong social structure, they're never in that state where they're this, call it, arrogant individual, or ignorant, really. And there's a Sanskrit word I prefer, just because I think, when we say the word ignorant, people take it as an insult,
Mm.
rather than to try and be genuinely descriptive, right? Like, what do you tell someone? You're like, hey man, I think you're ignoring a whole, call it, like, field of information. How come you haven't been interested to go there?
Uh,
It's genuine, right?
yeah.
But
Yeah.
if you say, hey, I think, ignorance has come into your, consciousness, it's just an insult and a
Yeah. It
defense
does come
mechanism.
across like that. Yeah. When it's
So,
really just a lack of awareness almost.
or fear,
Sure.
like you said, we seek comfort, we avoid the pain,
Mm.
we avoid being in an uncomfortable state. And so it's challenging for, I think, individuals, for their beliefs to be broken down when they're not ready, when they're a
Mm.
bit fragile in that. And that's what I've noticed is, if I'm going to get you healthy, I have to get you in a state where you have to make the right decisions. But if you have a
Mm.
belief system that's causing you to make bad decisions, this is
Yeah.
not going to work. And so
Man,
you have
it's
to.
it's so crazy how much our mindset affects like literally every aspect of our life. Like I've talked about mindset for a really long time. It's part of the reason why I even do this podcast. Like I feel like your mindset is like the most important thing in your life, but it really does affect like every single part of your life, your money, your health, your relationships, all of those things. And so I love when you're talking about like beliefs and how it can Like you said, it gets in the way almost of you improving. Like the thing you could like genuinely and like purposefully be like, I want to improve this part of my life. But if your belief systems do not align with the change you're trying to make, like you won't get there. So what I'm interested in what you described is like with people's health, their belief systems holding them back. I'm curious if there's any, like major ones that maybe someone listening could be like, oh, that's me. Maybe I need to work on that. I'm curious, like what big beliefs you feel like hold people back the most when it comes to their health.
Yeah, well, I would say, hey, easy things you can observe with yourself if you're doing. If you're quick to give an answer that's definitive, you're probably wrong.
Mm.
So if someone says like, "Oh, I wonder why that person's so resilient; they never get sick," and you're like, "Oh, it's genetics," you're wrong, right? Like that, you're the person that has avidya, that
Mm.
avidya has come into their life, right? This idea of ignorance, and so what do you do about that? Well, the first step is just making a decision, active awareness to, hey, I will be a little more observant of how I'm behaving. And like you
Mm.
said, our mindset, is the end all be all to what we will experience in life.
Yeah.
That's the beginning part of you to connect with what emotions you channel in a day to day, like what emotions you're evoking. And so this is the $1 million question here is that how emotionally mature are we as adults?
Mm.
Did we go through a rite of passage, or are we just a child that has aged? You know,
You're an adult child.
I see that as a reality, especially with individuals, because someone's doing something that's actively harming them, and you are like, hey, you're in your 40s. Why are you doing this? And it's clearly a coping mechanism that they developed earlier in life. They say, hey, this feels good. There's other things in my life that are causing me problems that I don't know how to deal with.
Mm.
And that was okay. There needs to be an acceptance with that. Someone's fighting around them. Someone was being belligerent. Someone's being neglectful. And, you cope by shifting your attention away. Like you're stuck in that scenario. You can't just run
Yeah.
away as a kid.
Yeah.
And so you pick up, well, the easiest things is foods and substances because they are pleasure, because pleasure is made simple so every organism can identify where their place in the world is. A squirrel is going to eat the appropriate things. A bird's going to eat the appropriate, depending on the beak, it'll know how to eat what's supposed to eat.
Mm.
So pleasure guides our actions. But then how did we deal with really challenging scenarios when someone didn't give us a tool set to say, hey, I know you're feeling like you're responsible for what's going on around you and these very, call it inept adults, but understand that there's a better role model. There's a better way to do this that'll lead you to a better harvest if you set yourself up, in one way or another. So, I think this part is something that it's difficult to talk about because how do I come in and just open up the conversation with, hey, we're going to
Sure.
talk about guilt. We're going to talk about shame. We're going to talk about
Yeah.
these emotional states. And really the best way to do it is to read through examples and stories that, touch and connect with individuals.
Yeah.
In a very simple sense, if someone's like, oh, what the hell is this guy talking about? Your perception of the scenario is going to dictate your emotional response. So you perceive that there is a snake on the ground. There isn't a snake in the ground. You just perceive that there is a snake in the ground. It looked like a stick, and you're going. And then all of a sudden you get scared.
Yeah.
I'm afraid of snakes, so I have a fear response. That equals to a blood chemistry change. That equals to your blood vessels dilating, changing.
Yeah.
That equals to a whole response of heat, energy, shifting from, blood going from your viscera out to your extremities to prepare to do something. If you were digesting food, you're not digesting it anymore because you're now preparing the flight or fight response.
Yeah.
But there wasn't even a snake there. Now
Mm.
take that scenario where there's individuals fighting. There's maybe somebody coming aggressively at your mom and dad. Why is this person yelling at my mom and dad? I don't know. And so what's the physiological response?
Mm.
And the emotions then guide the physical of what's going to happen there.
Mm.
So at the end of the night, when you go to sleep, what we actually remember is not the intellectual thoughts that we had, though we might if we keep attaching to them. But most people, if they have a good idea and they don't write it down, they'll forget. If you don't have a journal where you're keeping down
Mm.
certain ideas, you don't put it down on paper, you'll
Yeah.
forget.
Yeah.
But what do you remember? Well, what gets encoded in the subconscious is, can you fill in the blank?
Yeah. Emotion.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Like it's like imprints on you.
Yeah. So you remember, hey, I don't remember what, exactly, we talked about it. I remember we had a fantastic conversation, and man, I like being on that podcast, right?
Yes,
That's the emotional spot.
exactly,
He was,
exactly.
he was genuine. He was curious. He was
Yeah,
attentive. That those are the emotional components where I'll wake up, a year from now and be like, yeah, I remember that.
yeah.
And some people, they'll forget a person's name, but they'll remember an odd thing like, oh, they were in a fight with their mom last time I talked to them. How did that go?
Mm,
So they can't remember their name,
yeah,
but they can remember the fact that they had some kind of turmoil or some kind of celebration in their life. Maybe it was a positive spin. Maybe they were getting married. Maybe they were, renewing vows or on a honeymoon, or they just had a kid or something like that, right?
yeah,
The emotional component dictates, our subconscious, which
yeah.
then eventually guides our behavior. And so
Mm,
this part of health is way more, call it imperative, whether you're, doing everything right, whether you're eating the avocado and toast, because the information is eventually you'll get to it.
yeah,
That's it. Like if you're curious enough, if you're adamant enough, eventually you'll get to the information. But we're presented information nowadays to such an extent where we're being paralyzed. You don't even know what to act on.
yeah.
And that really is one part of, hey, you didn't do your homework, because you need to develop enough of a base. You need to have enough of a fundamental understanding, basic understanding, so you know how to sift through and saying, I can take this on and I can incorporate it, or this is outside the scope of what I have an understanding of. It's not worth my time or attention until I
Mm,
talk to someone I trust that can break it down for me
yeah,
in such a way. And I mean, I work with, call it engineers and lawyers, to help them have a better lexicon, better language to be able to talk to their healthcare professionals, because
mm,
even people that are very educated have not been given a framework so that they can ask the questions to get at the expert, right? And the questions
mm,
are very simple, right? The more complicated you want to make things, the harder it's going to be to actually follow through and keep it. But,
yeah.
for science, let me ask you here, what does science mean to you when someone says science? What's your expectation?
When I hear the word science, I think of testing. Like to me, it's like questioning and then running an experiment to see what the results might be. That's like what I view science as.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I would say that's the middle part of science. That's the work, right? That's the part no one wants to do, but everyone wants to know the result, right? No, that's the reality, right?
Yeah,
So no matter what something's presented, there has to have some point in time started from an observation. So
yeah,
we observe something. That's the
yeah,
basis of science. And
yeah.
science ultimately is a way of thinking that'll
Mm,
get you to what you said, an outcome in which you have confidence to know how often that outcome is going to occur.
yeah,
So, if someone's telling you something, if they're an expert, like, oh, well, this is the thing, hey, chance for risk for disease and all that kind of stuff, you start with like, hey, what's your observation? Like, how are you getting to here? So if you observe something, that means you must be able to detect it in some way, right? You, as the human organism, have multiple ways of detecting stuff. Now, you can make a machine, a photo tube that detects light, some kind of acoustics that can detect sound. So you can have a detection system. So if someone's telling you something that's like way out there, be like, what's your detection system? So people that got bamboozled, investors that got bamboozled with Theranos. I don't know if you're familiar
I'm
with that
not. No.
lady. There was a lady pretty popular, pretty out there, where she ran the scheme for numerous years, got millions of dollars of funding for this very fancy blood test. Hey, I'll take a little prick and I'll be able to tell you all these things about your health and your blood. Now, anybody in the field would tell you, oh, that she's lying. Like, this isn't real, because there's a level of, call it, progression and advancement technology. You can't just come out of nowhere from your basement being like, well, I can circumvent now, the last 50, 60 years of how we detect,
Yeah.
molecular targets. And so had someone paid, $200 to talk to a scientific consultant, they would have saved themselves hundreds of thousands of dollars in investments, right? So this is
Mm-hmm.
like, you got to pay for knowledge, not to get bamboozled.
Mm,
But all you had to ask was like, what's your detection system? So it doesn't matter really what the science is. There's some way you're going about detecting things, right?
yeah.
The physicists with the fancy CERN and whatnot, they have a way that they're detecting those particles when they smash. You can still ask them. It might be outside the scope of what you understand, but now that you've asked a question, at least you understand the level of entry for that conversation. Where the question, it didn't really matter who you're talking to, it's still the same question.
Yeah.
And this is the most important part of, call it, the way of thinking, is you're going to go from observation into some kind of knowledge base. Like you're going to already, just based off observing things, you're going to have preconceived notions, you're going to have assumptions, and you're going to try to put those observations into symbols, into language, into characters. So if you don't do this well, nothing works from here. And so this part is something that you have to come agreed upon, and you have to have a level of trust in the observer. And if you're the observer, this is what everyone knows who actually has to do the task. It feels very uneasy putting it down, but everyone trusts you once you do. Because you as the observer, you're like, well, I saw all these other things that could be part of it. Do I write it also down? Oh, I just conflating my story. All right, I'll keep it out for now. But in the back of my head, I'll think like, okay, there's a lot more going on here. And then, like you said, the next part of science is doing the work, right? Make an experiment in which the most important thing is, did you compare the right things? You got to take a measurement. That measurement, you're going to set up some kind of experiment. You're going to get some evidence. But if you compare, the lingo goes, you got to compare apples to apples, or oranges to oranges.
Yeah.
So if I take you and I say, hey, look, I'm going to compare you to an Alzheimer's patient. Oh, you're trending in the same direction. This is bad. You're going to get Alzheimer's. That's not fair. You're one marker going in the same direction as,
Sure.
Alzheimer's patient. That person's already have massive changes in their physiology.
Sure.
You'd have to have a lot of different things trending in the same direction before you could even, make that conclusion. But you'll see how within, call it the nonsense of today's what's put out, you have a very deliberate way of comparing things in which would skew you to a certain story so I can sell you an idea. And selling ideas, you have to understand sometimes, what you think is one entity is actually, 5 entities owned by the same individual. And so they have a portion of their, call it, bigger product being presented by another company that's giving you an idea first. It said something in like, oh, breakfast is the most important, meal of the day. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? Eat, eat, eat. And you don't have to buy this stuff, but now you're presented all these other things. And so the scope of what you're presented, you should always come into the question of, hey, out of all of the things that we could be talking about, why is this being presented to me? Because it's often trying to sell you on a lifestyle, on an idea, on a belief system.
Okay. So there's a couple things here. First of all,
Hit me.
My wife is pregnant right now with our first kid. And
Congratulations.
Thank you. So we've been, Instagram knows, and so it's been showing us all of these reels about, giving birth and all this stuff. And someone pointed this out, and I thought it was like it's like, to me, it's a perfect example of what you were saying, where they were saying okay, hold on, let me try to remember what the statistic was. It was, shoot, I don't remember now. But basically what they were saying was, okay, if you go this route, there is twice the amount of risk associated. And all the moms go, oh my gosh, twice the amount of risk. Like I won't do that thing. And then you look at the number and it's like, okay, but it's 0.15% risk is the first one and 0.3 the second route. And you're like, okay, so double, but like we're talking, 0.15 percentage points of a difference. Like that's not right. That's, and I'm not saying it's not important, but what I'm saying is like what you said, like the way things can be framed, it puts, it will move you in a certain direction, right? If someone says, oh, the difference is 0.15 to 0.3, you're like, okay, not a big deal. But if someone goes, it's double the risk, you go, right? Like a gasp, and you're like, okay, well, I'm not going to go that route. And then you look back and you're like, well, that's interesting. Why are they presenting it that way? And it's like, oh, well, because this route is the route that they make money from. And this route, they don't make money from it. So I feel like that's like a perfect example of what you were just describing. And
absolutely,
another example that popped in my head, I was talking to my wife about this. I don't know enough about it. Maybe you do, but I've been seeing some reels that were talking about water. And they were saying how like we've been sold on this idea that we need to be drinking all this water every day, when in reality, a lot of our water should be coming from the food that we're eating. And they're like 15 years ago, like people weren't walking around with water bottles. And now everyone, myself included, here we go, everyone's walking around with a Stanley, constantly sipping water. And I didn't think about it. And then I was like, that's a really good point. Like 15 years ago, like nobody was even talking about, are you getting enough water? Are you drinking enough? And I don't know. I just felt like that was another example that made me stop and go, oh, that's kind of a good point. And And I realized in my own eating habits that when I'm eating, and I don't know if this is even right, I didn't dig enough into it, but I'm thinking like when I'm eating like, like whole foods and like fruits and all these things, I'm not as thirsty. Like I really don't need to be drinking that much water every day. And I think, oh, I'm not drinking enough, but I don't have any sort of side effects or like headaches or anything from being, signs of dehydration. And so I go, oh, that's kind of interesting. Like it makes me wonder if that's true. But I just think that's another example where you're like, oh yeah, that's kind of a good point. They've been pushing this, and it's like I wonder why. What, to just sell more bottled water, to sell these big ass Stanleys? Like what's the deal?
Yeah, well, what you described there was relative versus absolute statistics,
Yeah.
right? So if you do the absolute, you'd say from zero point 0.1 to 0.3 or so.
Mm-hmm.
The relative one is when I compare two numbers and then tell you that comparison,
Yeah.
right? And that's a really good example of how you can bamboozle. How do you make it so that when you have no results, no findings, them sound very exciting, right? And that's another thing. It's like, hey, I need traction, I need clout. Here's how I can get it by sensationalizing or knowing how to call it. Play with the presentation of data.
Yeah.
The academics, they call it intellectual masturbation, where
Yeah. For sure.
and you'll see it in some presentations where someone's just taken something very simple they could have done, and they go through a ring around of math, of statistics, of tests, of comparisons, and you're sitting there wondering, like, what the hell does this all mean? Does it mean anything?
Yeah.
And they're very confident in call it this runaround where they have a lot of value with what they're bringing to the table. But the notion of water, I'll tell you, I can shed this much light
Sure.
on what you're saying. The first part is you're absolutely right with that. When we eat, we pull water and it helps us become hydrated. And so this is the key word there is hydration, right? You drinking water doesn't necessarily hydrate you. You might just go to the bathroom right away. So when you eat the food, it comes with lots of stuff, which means that pulling water in becomes easier because you can't just, how'd you say it, like open up the floodgates and be like, water, please enter the appropriate spots. You have to play a game of having salts and solute, it's called, just like stuff that makes it so that water moves in a certain direction. So what's the easiest way to be hydrated for when you drink water is that you have to squeeze out all your tissues, your lymph, your blood vessels like a sponge so that all of the, call it, stuff goes into the blood, to your pee, into your poo, and you defecate it out.
Yeah.
Now when you drink water, it's like that sponge is absorbent, it's pulling stuff in. So what are we talking about? We're talking about stretching, we're talking about walking, we're talking about exercise, quote unquote.
Really?
So when you do any kind of exercise, you'll notice how, I'll drink water, I'm thirsty, like I want water. Go for a hike, you're like, yeah, give me water, I want water.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you have a tiny bit of lemon or salt or something in water, it's easier to pull that water in. Put some either cucumber, strawberry, blah, blah, blah. So that other, call it salt, makes it so that it's easier to absorb. But now we come into a notion where sometimes our tissues are dehydrated and we think like, well, I'm hungry. So we go and eat. And you're not hungry. You have too much already energy you're dealing with. And what happens when you have too much energy? Well, electrical discharge, it arcs, it comes out, your battery starts leaking and all the other stuff. It's the exact same thing within our tissues, within the cell and how it has to store the energy. It starts leaking out. It starts doing radical damage to your DNA, and that's what aging is. So the overconsumption of food is a massive part to what's taking your life away, because you want to play at a very, like a thermostat, at a range in which you operate where, hey, I am genuinely hungry. Please eat food, or I'm going to tap into my fat stores. Maybe for some of us, we want that, right?
Yeah. Please tap into the fat stores. That'd be great.
So, for yourself here, if you don't know this, but what inhibits access to fat?
That's a good question. I don't know. Sugar?
So,
I'm thinking back to the conversation you mentioned earlier about the donuts.
Yeah, so absolutely. So when you have something that's going to cause your insulin to rise, it's going to say, hey, you know what, hold on to the fat stores. Carbohydrates are plentiful. And usually what causes your insulin to rise very high is carbohydrate foods, right? Sometimes the carbohydrate food is low glycemic, meaning it doesn't spike your blood sugar as much, meaning that there's less of an insulin response, and therefore sometimes a better option for people that are struggling with, call it, this hormonal cascade, this hormonal response.
Sure.
So if you want access to your fat stores, then you definitely can't be constantly, hitting the glucose, hitting the carbs, because the more that you spike your insulin, it's telling you, it's signaling, saying, hey, store the fat. We're going to save this for the wintertime or for when there's no more carbs in the environment. But here we are in the modern day age with the refrigerator, with global trade, with access to carbohydrates 365 days of the year, and we just never stop.
Mm.
Whereas before, come fall, yeah, you might have some pumpkin, you might have some squash, you might have other things that you've stored, but come December, January, now you're eating your fats, you're eating things that are, heavy protein, heavy fat. There's just no more carbs present in your environment. You might have canned some peaches here, you have some dessert, that's fine, but before 16 to 18 hours in a day, you have none of this. Therefore, insulin's not spiking. Therefore, your access to fat is phenomenal. So this thing of going from fat to not fat, this idea of entering ketosis. I don't know if these things, I think from right now, it's very much so in the public consciousness.
Yeah.
But, this is what I refer to as metabolic flexibility. And if you want health, you must have metabolic flexibility on a, call it back burner in your head, thinking every day I need to enter ketosis. It's okay if I exit. I don't have to stay in ketosis, but I must enter it. I must allow this process to occur because lots of benefits. It comes with the fact that it's not just the energy source from the ketones. It's actually secondary, because we're not a really issue for energy today. We're an issue for nutrition, which is very different. And that ketone acts like a signaling molecule for health. It tells your brain saying, turn on membrane protective molecules, membrane protective proteins, protect the membrane, right? So the ketone comes in, it says reinforce the membrane. All right, it goes to other parts of your body and it says, hey, turn on DNA protecting software. Right, so it's communicating for you the health and longevity. If you don't turn this on for 20 years, what do you mean you're surprised that you're having degenerative diseases of the brain?
Interesting. And so ketosis, just to be clear, that is caused by not eating. Is that
Two
correct?
things.
It's like
Yeah,
fasting, right?
so fasting, you'll enter ketosis in about 8 hours.
Okay.
If you go for an endurance run, you'll enter it in about 2 hours.
Okay.
So long as you don't keep spiking your insulin.
Okay.
So even if you eat, but you eat something that doesn't spike your insulin, let's say you have coconut, coconut fat and steak, you're going to be in ketosis, right? So the idea of the keto diet, and I'll just say as a scientist, the whole notions of diet is a way to camouflage what you're eating. Where you say you're eating keto, hey, I'm eating a keto diet. I still have no clue what you're eating. Right? You could be eating bacon every day. You could be eating eggs entirely. You could be just eating cheese.
Yeah.
So you never want to define something by what it's not, right? I'm not going to be like, hey, the thing outside right now is not an elephant. I still don't know what it is. Hey,
Cool.
right outside my window is, not a zoo. There's no zoo in front of my. You still have no clue of whether I'm looking at a tree or whether I'm looking at, a truck stop or whether I'm looking at, a mall behind me. No clue. So the idea of diets is just that. It's to camouflage what you're eating. It's very irritating when I'm someone that's supposed to help overcome health challenges and someone tells me, no, I'm eating very healthy. I'm eating a keto diet. And that's where they stop giving information.
Yeah.
Like, okay, well, we have bigger problems here because there's an issue in just simply understanding that, the scope of complexity of what we're dealing with, or ability to communicate very basic things. We're not there yet. There's an idea that your food group knows that has no consequence in your health. And now this, just one idea you got hooked on of ketosis is it. No, it's just another biochemical process that's occurring amongst, call it thousands of others.
Sure.
Which, you know what I mean? Like we're not going to touch on all of them, obviously, but it's a good, call it grounding metric to know, okay, here's an idea that I have to incorporate in my life. Here's a life philosophy now to live by, and this is going to give me health. Because I don't expect anyone other than, call it, maybe there's a handful of us on the planet that care about this, right? It's our responsibility to bring it to you in ways in which you can incorporate in your life where you're like, okay, great, I'm having a healthy life because I spent time learning from these guys, not what they exactly know, but what they gave me in terms of a packaged gift of information, because that's what we do. That's my gift I share with the world. And metabolic flexibility is something now to keep in your head. Hey, am I switching what's in my blood? And if you're not, why not? What are you going to do about it? Because the consequences are very, very real, because we used science to get to this type of idea. We observed people, we observed the biochemistry. Now we did an insane amount of measurements, right? We have tons of experimental evidence. We have really, really good comparisons to know, okay, here's the nitty gritty that's actually happening. We know this for a fact. And then we get into the last part of science. What's the last part of science? You've concluded it, is that you're going to make a prediction.
Mm.
Like that's the last. So all three parts here I talked about: observe, measure, predict. They can stand on their own, right? You want to
Yeah.
go observe a bunch of mushrooms in the forest. Great, you did awesome. You write them down. Now you give that to the next guy. He's got a key. He knows what's in his neighborhood. Next guy comes along. Well, I want to know what's in the mushrooms. Let's start doing some measurements and evidence. I'll start feeding it to animals. Maybe I'll try some. Let's see if I get sick or not. All right, we have. Don't do that, by the way. But,
Yeah.
right. You, in a simple sense. Now the next part is, okay, now I'll predict when I have this mushroom, it'll be spicy. Now when I have this mushroom, it'll make me vomit. And maybe you want to vomit because you poisoned yourself.
Yeah.
And when I have this mushroom, it'll make me hallucinate. Hey, when I have this mushroom, it'll give me easy absorption of protein because the mushroom has the ability to make it, a bioavailability for protein, helps digestion for the protein. So that's the last part. And that's a very important part. It's a gift that you leave for others. It's like, hey, I've done all these experiments. Why? Because now I want to be able to know how to predict the future.
Mm.
And so that eventually, when you have a prediction, what you did is you came up with a model system. And it's always useful. Even if your model describes the world or the outcomes to 40%, you're like, that's garbage. That's not good. That's fantastic because now we have something to work off of.
Yeah.
It only explains 40%. What are the things that we have to go back to the observations that we didn't include so that we can measure it, so that we can add to the model? And when the model gets to what I would say closer and closer to always be predictive, it starts incorporating into our lives in a way it becomes technology, in which then it just runs. Or it becomes, call it an evolutionary scale, part of our biology, where it's now no longer, and this is more like I guess, metaphysical idea that I have here, but it becomes so ingrained into you that it's no longer part of this thinking process. It's incorporated into your existence.
Mm.
And how new things come about. It's in my head, but I'll deviate and come back to just the idea that it's very simple. You conclude your work with a prediction, and that allows you to refine this constant idea of, okay, I'll build on my predictive capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Allows new technologies then to work from that.
Yeah.
And if you did quality science, it doesn't matter when you did it. The science is separate from the story. Meaning I took blood levels of, let's say, lactic acid from you 100 years ago. Well, I knew your age, I knew the source or the location I took it from, I knew the methodology I used to get the number. And I could say, okay, 100 years now in the future, do we have the same lactic acid values? What about when we exercise? Are they the same as they were 100 years ago? Did the physiology change at all? That's all very useful. That's the science. But the fact that they guessed that lactic acid was causing people to be sore, or they thought, okay, lactic acid gets sore. Okay, we have more experiments to fine tune it and exclude and set up paradigms in which we can interact with this model to say, no, that's not what's actually causing it. That doesn't take away from the fact that the science is still sound. The measurements, the locations, the people, the characterizations. And we can use that to build on, let's say we wanted to make predictive, algorithms on lactic acid. We say, hey, you know what? In 100 years, they never changed in people. A 26-year-old woman had this value. 26-year-old woman had this value, obviously within, demographics, same place on the planet, so on and so forth. And we can say, hey, it's useful. But it's good to know that, even though there was massive shifts in cultural and other things, this thing is stable. So that's science. And if you did a crap job where I don't know who you pulled from, I don't know what location you drew from, I don't know the methodology you used, there's nothing. Like, we're not working off of that. We're not building off of that. And this is a very, I think, important idea for people to bring back into their understanding, because I see people that have a kinesiology degree and now they stepped out of, where they've been working, what they've been doing, and they're in this emotional space where they're, hey, I'm having a great time doing these sessions to help people heal from the trauma and do these other things. I've gone away from science. I'm like, whoa. Go away from, why would you stop thinking that way? What are you talking about? And they're like, no, I just gone away from this. And they describe it almost like a religion of what science is. Like, this, idea that you have to do. It's like, no, you still approach even things that are very difficult and not easily tangible, interactable in the same manner.
Yeah.
What are you observing? How are you observing it? Okay,
Yeah.
you're observing it through your own state. Okay, that's
Yeah.
fine. If you put someone else, not you, will they observe it the same, or will it be a little bit different? Different. Okay, well, can you try and find some middle ground where this is not occurring? Is there something else you can put there that can be a consistent way for you to observe something? Oh, there is. Oh, great. You need four of you to be able to come to the consensus of
Mm.
of what you're observing. Okay, maybe you need 10, whatever,
Yeah.
right? But you still bring back the notion of bringing in a type of way in which you're going to have a systematic approach to then have a predictive outcome. Even if the predictive outcome is not very good, even
Yeah.
if it's at 20, 30%, you recognize, all right, me as the texture system isn't very good. I have biases in my own filters that are coming into play, but maybe there's a set of questions, maybe there's a set of, call it exercises or paradigm, in which I give to the individual that then will give me a way in which I'm confident that I can move forward. And this is, in the sense
Yeah.
where when things aren't already fully crystallized and given to individuals, they think like, well, I can't approach it with science. Where,
Mm.
funny enough, if you got an education in science, it should be the opposite.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah.
it should be, here's the world, it's a mystery. How are you going to go about bringing it into a way in which we can then build off of?
Well, yeah,
Right?
because
What
that's really all science is just a way of thinking, essentially.
essentially, yeah.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
so like you said, it's kind of, I mean, obviously there's way more to it than that, right? Like from everything you've been describing, but I just like approaching life from this, okay, I'm going to observe, I'm going to measure, and I'm going to make a prediction, and then I'm going to keep doing that over and over again. I'm going to keep observing and keep measuring, keep making more predictions. And like I love what you said, and that was actually something I wanted to bring up to you, is that it seems like um it does. So it's funny when you said the person described like science almost like a religion. It is kind of funny because it can feel like that sometimes. Like especially lately, it seems like if you are somebody who kind of is like questioning something that's normal, like especially in the science realm, like it tends to be like, oh, you're, so you're a crazy person, or like you need to trust the science or whatever it might be. And it's just like, what are you talking about? Isn't the whole point of science to question and to build on what we know? And like when I look at it, it feels like a religion, right? Like
Well,
my part of my background, I have a super religious background. I'm not religious anymore, but like I have that background, and I'm like, yeah, it really is like that. Like when you question something and it's like, no, don't question it. Like you're not allowed to question it. We know for a fact. And you're like, that doesn't feel very scientific to me. But just to be clear, it's not scientists that are saying this, right? It's people, like people who have chosen to be like, oh, I'm going to do what, whatever the, typical thing to do is in regard to this scientific thing. And if by doing that, saying I'm choosing that this is the fact, and anyone who questions it otherwise is, questioning the science.
let's break that down. Trust the science, right? There's the clear statement of saying you no longer need to know, you need to believe, right? It's another way to say it.
Wow. Yeah.
And
Very
the
true.
extremely important part of when you are in the state where like, well, no, I'm asking a question, is to have enough verbiage to be able to plant seeds in other individuals so they can't come at you with emotion, right?
Mm,
And then, it's very easy to do this when you are prepared. It's very hard to do this in the moment, because when someone comes at you emotionally, it is attempting to bring your emotions into the equation.
yeah.
So, hey, what are you, stupid? You don't trust the science? And then your approach to that can be, one of many ways, depending on how much humor you want to bring to the table. But you say, no, I'd like to know my science. I don't like to believe in it. Right. And that will give
Mm,
someone just a very quick, be like, I don't understand what he said. But they seem very confident in that. And I would also like to know the science. And so another thing would be like, well, if you trust the science, that means you don't know it, do you? Does anyone know it? Who knows it? Point me in the right direction.
mm.
And if they can't, then you're like, okay, man, you're talking out of turn. Like, just sit down. I
It's,
understand you're
yeah.
frustrated. I understand you're upset. It's probably because you're not asking the questions. I'm brave enough to ask, just step aside.
Yeah.
And it's a very polite way of, you don't have to be a dick about it, but you do have to be, call it, brave enough to be able to put people, you know, outside of your, call it, emotional well-being, right? Like you
Yeah.
got to bring your shields up.
Yeah.
And, if they're coming at you with emotion, know that they've already they've already lost the argument, right?
Mm,
There is no argument there.
yeah.
And you engaging with someone that can't argue is you wasting your time.
Yeah. Good point.
So knowing how to be able to diffuse this part, I mean, that's a skill of life, really.
Oh, for sure.
And and you and I and I've and I would I bank the fact that the people that have humor in how to be able to engage with people that are emotional are some of the smartest people on the planet.
For sure.
Right? Like
For sure.
how to throw a joke in there at them at the same time while they're laughing, and this person is kind of with their head in the clouds, like, I don't even know if to be upset anymore.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
But
I love what you said because it just like it really like puts it into this like perfect little package because like you said, so trust, so you mean like believe, but my choice is to know. And if I don't know, I'm gonna ask. Like that's ultimately what it is. Is like I'm not afraid to ask the question. Like I remember when I was in school and I had a question, I would raise my hand and ask the question, and then other kids would be like, "Well, you weren't like afraid?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Like I just want to know. Like what am I afraid of? Like you know what I mean? And so like I do think it's important. Like, see, this is my thing is I don't go at it and be like, well, that thing's just wrong. Right. I'm not coming at it and claiming that whatever this main thing that people are doing is wrong. I'm just asking for myself. I'm like, well, I just don't understand it. Can I better understand it? Like, where can I go so that I can understand this better so that I can make a decision for myself? Does that make sense?
yeah, absolutely. I do say we're in a time where who do you trust, right? And this is why it's super important to find individuals that help you build yourself, help you develop yourself. Because no one's going to follow you around all the time and be like have the answer for all of your complexities
Mm-hmm.
that you're dealing with,
Yeah.
especially with your biology, right? Like it takes 51% to get something published to be like, hey, great, here's a trend. How often are you in that 49%? And this is why it's kind of an interesting year for what spaces you want to participate in. I mentioned that your social structure for me is the end all be all to whether a person will have ignorance or avidya or these other kind of complications come in. But when you have a social structure where the moment that you start saying things, someone's like, oh no, buddy, what are you talking about? That's you're fully off base. You don't know anything. And you like that person enough where you don't just retreat, where you're still part of the social group. Now you have to listen to them. You have to hear the other side of things. You have to develop, even if you don't care to memorize it, you have to develop as a person and be like, okay, well, that was wrong. That's fine. And when you have a social group that's strong enough that covers so many bases of life, that covers, let's say, global scenarios, that covers financial issues, that covers health, and your aging across time. What is the right thing to do at the right time? What you can engage in from psychological components on how to deal with family, how to deal with coworkers, how to deal with clients, how to deal with proposals, all this other stuff. You as an individual benefit tremendously by participating in this social structure that's
Mm-hmm.
quite strong. And when you see, for example, like the lockdowns, right, that caused people to have no conversation with their neighbor or have an idea of what everyone else is thinking.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden, the notion for the average individual is that, well, everyone's thinking what the media is presenting, when the reality is very few people are thinking that.
Mm.
Right? The minority is probably thinking that. And then
Sure.
you just buy into something where, okay, here's the next thing I'll do. Here's the next thing I'll do. Here's the next thing I do. But if you follow the general status quo, you're going to end up with cancer. You're going to get up with some kind of dementia. That's what's waiting for you if you follow the, call it, recommended way of living.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it recommended for who?
Yeah.
Recommended for what outcome? Like, what are we
And
talking
by
about?
who, just to be clear. For who and
And
by who.
and sadly, that is the state we're in. So what circles do you put yourself in? What circles do you participate?
Mm-hmm.
And what, call it, work have you done beforehand to be able to step into those circles to actually participate? One thing is pretty, what I do, I run a small group. It's a health guided group, but we cover so much more than health.
Yeah.
Really, what we cover the majority of is your mindset,
Mm.
and then check in on, we do it a Monday and a Friday scope, so that on Monday you set and align yourself, and on Friday you rank. How did you meet that, alignment? Did you stay with it? And that's transferred into people's productivity for work and businesses and entrepreneurs. They're saying, hey, I set this goal and whatnot, and it amounted to positive. And it's the same idea for their own health. So, I call the group the Immortal Hub, right? And it's capped at 12. And then at 12, I open up a new slot. But we do this in terms of slowly bringing in ideas, that philosophies that help you now set yourself up for success across a long period of time.
Mm.
And really, we didn't learn the biology. We didn't learn the physiology. We didn't learn, we didn't learn the mindset, but that's part of the physiology that can carry us across a lifetime, and it's a very like you are responsible for your mental state. Like, where is it going? That's
Yeah.
what I mean. You are and you were responsible for that at about age 11 or 12.
Mm.
And if you didn't know that, if someone didn't say, if your parents didn't say, your social structure didn't say, hey, you're responsible for your mind goes, you know, you might now be somewhere in your 40s, 50s, addicted to porn, just constantly, like, hey, I gotta have an access to this, even though you have a wife and all the other things, you're still addicted to something like that. Well, that was a failure at age, call it 13,
Mm.
and the social structure to not put that onus on the individual.
Mm.
And the longer you go life without incorporating philosophies of understanding what you're responsible for. We talk about metabolic flexibility. That's something you're responsible for. We're talking about now of you are in control. You are responsible for your mental imagery, right? This is the superpower. You have mental imagery.
Yeah.
You visualize things and then you bring it into fruition. You can visualize things and bring the emotion in. You talk about anybody that's doing transformational change for people. I mean, that's the code. You're going to visualize until you have the emotion. Once the emotion's there, it's going to rewire the brain on how you have to behave.
Yeah.
Because for things to change, you've got to change.
Yeah.
So this is what I've brought in with the Immortal Hub for people that are, they're saying, hey, I want to have access to this group. I want to be part of these conversations.
Yeah.
It is now up to the individual saying, hey, I want to participate in this, because you can scroll on Instagram and you can get swayed very easily with a relative statistic. And I see it all the time
Yep.
with people telling me stories like, oh, I
Yep.
saw this on Instagram. I saw this on, on TikTok. Oh, I saw this on Twitter. Oh, I saw this on YouTube Shorts. Or they won't admit where they saw it, but they'll say as if like they've gone and done some work to
Mm.
know the information. And, you know, there's just so much, I would say, expertise that you can develop in areas that, again, I've spent over 15 years, close to 2 decades with this. And I still feel like I know I am like, I have a grain of sand knowledge on a beach that's, encompassing the entire West Coast,
Yeah.
call it, of North America.
Yeah.
Whereas, and I feel that that's an advantage that I have, right? The fact that I have an idea of how much there is out there, knowing that
Mm.
it's like going scuba diving and you just look into the abyss. You have no idea the depth,
Yeah.
but at least you have a scope of what's around you and how to navigate, and you're not drowning. You can easily go, up and down, and you're alive and enjoying it. So, you know, that's I think one of the most important things. Like, your social structure comes up on top in terms of determining where you're going to go,
Yeah.
right? And if you're lucky enough to be born into a phenomenal family, good for you. If you're not, don't play victim.
Sure.
You got to go out and step into. If you've survived over age 18, if you're alive, you passed the hard part. Now you
Yeah.
actually have to be driving and deciding where your future lies, where your
Yeah.
timeline's going to end up.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that. Like, I do agree with the social structure, leaning more towards, a live, actual social structure. But what I will say too is something that, like, I've like talked about a lot is books, because like someone took the time to like take the things they have in their head and put it in like a way that you can learn it all like right now. Like, they have years and years of experience and they put it all into just like a book, and you can like learn that from them. To me, I'm just like, like I don't have enough time in the rest of my life to read all of the books that I want to read. Like, my Amazon cart, like the save later part, is just like, it's probably thousands and thousands of dollars worth of books just sitting there waiting for me to be like, okay, I'm gonna read this one next. I'm gonna read this one next. But like 100%, like that, like everything is out there if you are willing. But what you mentioned before, which I think is really important, is taking responsibility. Like, taking responsibility for your life. You're like, the quality of life that you have is on you. And I think it's hard for people to admit that, because then they have to look at the parts that they don't like and actually be like, oh, is that actually my fault? And here's the thing. What I will say is that, because there's gonna be somebody out there who's like, well, what about this happened to you? This happened to you as a kid, or blah blah blah. I'm not saying that stuff, right? Like, there's certain things, like for example, what you gave earlier, like as a kid, you can't control like what happens to you. And there's a lot of situations you have no choice but to be a participant in, because you're a kid, right? But like you mentioned, like once you get to a certain age, it is now your responsibility on like how you are going to move forward. And if you're willing to take responsibility and, in my opinion, have curiosity, there's no reason why you can't have everything you've ever wanted and have an amazing, enjoyable life, regardless of what you've been through up until this point. Because if you take responsibility, that means that you're like, okay, well now it's in my control, and you realize it's in your control. And if you have curiosity, there's nothing you can't know. There's nothing you can't know. It's all available right now to you. So yeah, that's kind of my take on it.
I mean, you said curiosity, stay curious. That is, how you beat a lot of the problems. Like you said, we talked earlier about, hey, ignorance, or call it the mental fog starting to set in.
Mm,
It is to stay curious
yeah.
and say, hey, hey, I'm not really curious. I'm not interested in things right now. Let me take a break. I probably need to rest. And, books, they've been my, go-to, where you can't necessarily rely on just one educator to tell you this is how it's done. And, I've read dozens of nutrition books, and there is wild takes. There's really wild
All
takes.
over the place. Yeah.
And very, very interestingly, every once in a while, the one wild take really hits where you're like, this guy's right.
Mm,
And what, for example, I've fasting is a big component for if you want to live long, live healthy, make yourself more resilient. And there is a lot of ideas that, hey, when you fast, you got to make sure you bring a lot of nutrients back in as soon as you're done fasting. And then there's a few individuals that says, no, don't worry about that. You're quite okay. The human body can deal without, call it, the need for all this nutrients right away. For days, months, actually, before you really start having problems. Obviously, if you're not like severely deficient in something, but
yeah.
your body would show you otherwise. And what they, the idea was, like, what you really want, you want to make sure that the first thing that you do is defecate. Like, you must go to the bathroom as soon as you're done your fast, because you don't want to eat a bunch of stuff. Then everything that you're trying to get out of your system sticks back to your system,
Mm,
because you're going through this process of chewing yourself up and putting it into a place where you're attempting to get it out. So you want to make sure you get it out. That's the most
mm,
important. I think, okay, that one makes the most sense. Let's see the data. Let's see what they backed up. And it makes, I would say, a light years jump in, my understanding of really what's going on with the body healing, the body cleaning out.
really.
Talking about entrepreneurial books, I've read a lot, and my favorite one by far is one called Traction.
Okay.
And so, that one is kind of revamped. I'm a solo guy right now, right? And I've used an entrepreneurial thing that is supposed to be for groups, for managing bigger companies, and I still found more value in that book than I did for God knows how many others
I
I've
think
read.
that's in my Amazon cart right now.
It's a good one, very good one. Even just knowing how to be able to run a meeting, or even for podcasts, for
Sure.
hey, what's the checklist to go through. But the idea is that's part of, Alan Watts. I've read tons of philosophy, from Seneca to Marcus Aurelius to, you name it. And, I read Alan Watts, and I was like, this guy sounds like he's saying in words my feelings.
Mm,
And so, that social structure, escapes time, but it still doesn't circumvent the need for the connection, from human connection.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
once you know this information, once you have it, if you don't bring it forward, it doesn't have the value, right? If you don't act on it,
Mm,
you're not really wise. You just
yeah.
have knowledge.
Yeah. Exactly.
And so, I do think it's very important to find areas where, one, you feel valued, where when you speak, people are
Mm,
excited, people appreciate your 2 cents on the matter.
yeah.
It's very important for you to be able to find places in where you feel like you're still learning from other individuals.
Yeah.
If you come to a group and you have no curiosity with what they're talking about, and that's okay if you don't. You don't have to pretend to be interested in everything. Like, as important as economics is, like, I only have so much of an attention span for it, where eventually we're in a zone of like, all right, everyone's just saying their feelings and ideas. Like, that's okay. These aren't natural laws that interest me. These aren't biochemical processes that dictate life. This is, ideas that dictate financial decisions, in which, yeah, it'd be great if someone just tells me, buy Bitcoin now or sell Bitcoin now.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
But, until I meet that guy, I'm not gonna, hold my breath. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, and I love what you said too about like it not replacing like actual human connection. And I totally agree with that. And what I will say is that it's become very popular to be like, I hate people and people suck. Like if you read through like comment sections or like just in general people posting stuff, they talk about it, how they hate people. And when I hear that, I'm just like, you're not. Are you? do you- I feel like you're missing the point of life. Like just like you, how you were describing, like ultimately, like that social structure is what's going to determine your life. It's like, man, if you're cutting yourself off from that social structure from the get go by just saying that you hate people and that people suck, it's like, well, what are you expecting? Like, this is literally what life is about, you know? And so I think it's really, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it really is like, if what's funny, if someone says, I hate people, people suck, like, my guess is that you need to spend more time with more people. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's probably because you hate your life, but it's because you haven't talked to enough people. Because like, it's like what you said, it's like, that's where all of the like support and learning and growth and like enjoyment comes from, is connecting with people. And so that would be my message. If someone is like, oh, people suck, it's like, talk to more people then. Like, go interact with more people. I guarantee you, like, you're gonna come to the opposite conclusion. I've heard so many people, even personally, tell me that they used to like, oh man, I hated like talking to people. And that, like, I just was talking to someone last week who was saying how, yeah, like, I used to feel like I was really introverted and didn't like people. But, I went on this work trip and I decided, you know what, I'm going to try just like being different this time. I'm going to like, purposely start conversations. And like, I actually had a really good time. Like, I think I might be kind of more extroverted, to be honest. And when she said that to me, it just was like, wow, like, yes, this is exactly it. Like, I think people are like cutting themselves off from, in my opinion, one of like the most enjoyable parts of life, um, for the sake of like a label, right? Because it's like, oh, someone called you introverted, or you described yourself as introverted at some point, and then you cut yourself off from this. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I would say if someone's language is they say I don't care, or if they say something along the lines of, I don't like people, and then they go about telling you the thing they don't care about. Reality is that the word don't you can take out, and what they're saying is I care about this.
Mm,
And it might be like I care about this person doing this thing and it's making me upset,
mm,
because the brain doesn't acknowledge the can't. What it acknowledges is the time allocated for this idea. Right. So if they're saying
interesting.
I don't like people, it's they're saying is I'm having a difficult time with connecting with people. Me personally, I'm fascinated with the human organism,
Yeah.
like the human biology. This is what has driven me, time and time again. The things that I've done, it's reinforced that. I have an absolute pleasure and satisfaction knowing more about, what we are,
Yeah.
right? That's why I can do the biochemistry, and I don't have to force it to memory.
Yeah.
This is why I know the Krebs cycle off the top of my head, not because I'm forcing it, but because by knowing it, I can connect to different physiological processes that then I can play this game of prediction in your or my system.
Yeah.
And I don't ever truly know, but by guessing, I get better and better at knowing. And when I meet people that are very unique, they break the mold, and then I get to know another part of the equation,
Mm,
but it's still within that framework. They don't have additional biochemistry. They just have biochemistry in which one part's activated, the other part's maybe dampened,
mm.
and so the people thing I hear quite a bit too, especially with my dog. They'll come up and they'll say, hi to my dog. They say, oh, I like dogs more than
Oh
people.
my, yes, I've heard that so many times.
All right. And I find that cute in a lot of ways, because that's the person also attempting to do that, be
Mm,
outside of their skin,
yeah.
make the conversation, and that's always sort of like an olive branch. Be like, well, do you want to talk about this further? And and you have fun with, call it, different personalities. Where if hey, you hate people, it's like, oh, you seem to like me and my dog. I guess you only like dog people. Hey, that's
There
normal
you
too.
go.
I recognize we're the more social ones in today's day and age.
Mm,
Hey, what do you think is going on, right? And then makes brings a smile to their face because they have an opportunity to talk, connect. But I'm in the West Coast here in Vancouver, and I can see that there's a mental health, I think,
mm,
issue North America for sure. I don't know, but the rest of the globe, where people don't say hi to each other. Obviously in big
mm.
cities that makes sense, but to a point where you're avoiding eye contact.
Yes. Yes, dude,
You
all the
know,
time. Like, I live in like a
yeah,
tiny little community here, like of townhouses, and I like
yeah,
will stare at people. Like, to just like look at me. Like, I just want to just like nod and say hello, right? Because we're neighbors. But people just like bloop, like they just like purposely look away.
yeah. Maybe it's the idea that others have ill intention, or others have, call it, some antagonism.
Yes.
And I think the majority of people have compassion in their hearts, right? Obviously not
100%.
everyone. And this is how you manipulate the human being. You play on their compassion. And maybe this is the fear that's set in from across. I
Mm,
don't know exactly all the ins and outs that's engineered this state, but I definitely see that across my lifespan. I'm 36 now. I've seen it get worse before it's gotten better,
totally.
right? So then it's asked, the question is, what side of the equation would you be on? Do you want to just go landslide it down and be part of it, or do you interject here and bring something where, you know, your choice, right? You get to choose. You don't have to carry on the, call it karma or the sins of the past.
Yeah.
You get to redirect your bloodline. You
Yeah.
get to redirect which way, you know, life will go from your lineage on every single day, right?
Yeah.
Every single choice. So, you know, choose to be a little bit better than the day before instead of comparing to someone else, right?
Yeah, I feel like I have to, like, instead of staring now, I just have to, like, hey, how's it going? Just like get people to look at me because I'm like, man, like I do really want to like work against that. Like I like like just you're 100% right. You know what I saw? You've heard of Gary V?
Uh, Gary
Gary
V.
Vaynerchuk. Anyway,
Vaynerchuk. Oh yeah, yeah.
so I saw this video he posted recently, and he was talking about the dog thing, where it's like people just by default love dogs, right? They'll go up to a dog and just assume the best about the dog and want to pet them and play with them and all this stuff, but they hate people. Like exactly what you said. Like, oh, I love dogs more than people. And he was like, I just wish it was the opposite. Like, and not that people hated dogs, but like that people viewed the same thing as others. Like you come across another human being and you want to say hello and you want to interact with them just like you do with a dog. Like literally people walk up to a dog and they go, oh, can I pet him? And they start rubbing them and say, how you doing? You're so good, blah, blah, blah. And maybe they'll like play with them or something. And you're like, but with a human, you're like, wall up. Like, I don't know what this person's about or what they're going to do, instead of just assuming the opposite. Cause you know, what's funny is what you said. Like, I talk about that all the time, where I do believe that, like, of course, there's some people where this isn't the case, you know, but I do believe like most people, like the default setting for human beings is just good. And if you believe that, then that changes your entire interaction, like when you go out into the world, you know. For me, I'm like, I feel like I talk to people all day every day and I'm just like, man, this is awesome, people are so cool. Right? But if you go into the world thinking like, oh, people are bad, or like people have bad intentions, like you said, you kind of go, you live this like siloed life where you just have these blinders on and you don't interact with people. And what's funny is that that just proves it further, right? That just
Yeah.
pushes you further in that direction.
Yeah, you not to be mistaken here. You do need to have defense mechanisms and filters to be able to, you know, snuff out deception. You know, not be so open minded that your brain falls out. You know, but absolutely is to be fearless with being able to show love. You know, I would say that that would be the approach where the human organism is very dangerous, right? Like inherently, this is true, right? Like the human organism is exceptionally dangerous, probably the most dangerous creature on planet Earth. And when it's cornered, you don't know how it's going to
Mm,
react. And this is why I think it's, you know, it feels like an absolute miracle when you meet someone that when they are pushed to the brink, that what when you squeeze them, what comes out of them is integrity, honesty, nobility,
mm,
you know, passion, uh, a kingdom, right? They're building stuff for others, not
yeah.
just for themselves, right? The reality is that more people are in this direction than not. I'm not saying everyone is, but that's my bias. That's my belief.
Yeah.
It's not my knowledge. This is my belief. I
Sure.
believe more people, let's say 60%, maybe 65 are like this, where
Yeah.
when you squeeze them, if you know they've had a good enough opportunity to grow and develop as a person, they'll do the right thing.
Yeah.
Where a lot of other people are quite cowardly, you know, and you can't judge them too harshly. You just have to say, okay, you know, you didn't step up when you could have.
Yeah.
Like, you know, what are you going to do next time?
See, okay. So first of all, like I totally respect that. For me, I think the percentage is way higher, but this is what I'll say. I bring up the dog thing again because I feel like it's a perfect example. People who love dogs, if they walk up to someone's dog and they go, oh, I'm gonna pet them, and the dog like barks at them and like snaps at them, they go, oh man. And they go, well, you know, maybe he was raised in a home where he was abused or so, right? They immediately give the dog the benefit of the doubt. You hear a story and that a dog has to be put down, and people who love dogs are like, oh my God, no, like don't blame the dog, blame the owner. But then when a person does something bad, they go, people, God, people are awful. People are the worst. And you're like, bro, can you not like think for 2 seconds, like maybe give that person the benefit of the doubt? What have they been through? What have they experienced? And like see, I love the dog example because people like it just everybody does that. Like when a dog acts like that, no one's like, good, get that dog, like kill it, you know. You're like, no man, I feel so bad for that dog. I can't believe whatever it went through, that it was, you know, that it happened to act out in this way. And it's like, man, I really do believe the same about human beings. And I know that I'm not like naive. I'm not ignorant to the fact that people do bad things. But just like in the example with the dog, it's kind of like, okay, yes, I know people do bad things, but also I don't know what that person has been through and what that person has experienced. And just like I would give, a dog that's lashing out the benefit of the doubt and be like, I don't know what happened to them. It's like, well, I'm going to do the same thing with people. Because if you ask anybody who loves dogs, you're like, do you think dogs are good? Do you think dogs are inherently good? They're going to say yes. Like, they're like, yeah, they're so sweet and lovable and blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, okay, so what is the harm in believing that in people? While also, just like you mentioned with the defense mechanism, dogs, right? Even people who love dogs recognize when they walk up, most of the time they'll be like, can I pet the dog? Is it okay? Right? They'll ask the owner first because okay. I mean, some dogs maybe are not okay with you petting them. Maybe they were abused and they do get defensive and they might bark or bite, right? And so it's not that you're unaware of the fact that that can happen, but like my belief is that baseline default is good.
Yeah, I definitely get behind that. Yeah, I definitely get behind that. The default is good. I agree. I don't know what the percentage is.
Yeah, I don't either.
You know, I
I can
don't.
claim to know, but I have no clue, right? None of us really
I
do.
don't. I don't know in which area of the world there is more or less. If there is a place on the planet there's more, then it's interesting to observe what is it.
Mm,
I would say communities that are religious often tend to be more with integrity
mm,
and upholding those aspects, right? And in a place where they're very secure, all right. And one thing I've noticed for studying centurions, people that live to 100,
mm,
they're often very religious without the religion,
mm.
right? They didn't get caught up by bad tropes, but they
Interesting.
held together this connection of, hey, I'll exist at a higher state of consciousness in which I'll hold myself to, because there's a reverence for something
So
else.
would you say like spirituality more than religious?
I use the word spirituality as very, call it, tangible.
Okay.
The root of spirituality is spirit, right? If we agree there, and the word spirit means to breathe.
Mm,
And when you look at scientifically, what is that trying to tell us? Well, it's trying to tell us, hey, oxygen comes in, and what comes out? Carbon dioxide, right? And so what happens to the oxygen? It gets turned into not carbon dioxide. It gets turned into water. So every time you breathe in, you're getting water. So
interesting.
you're converting the outside world into yourself. You are connected to the outside world. Where did oxygen come from? Came from a plant. So you're connected to the plant, and this is when we say the word spirituality, we're connected to the
Connectedness. Yeah.
world around us, right?
Yeah, I love that.
You're connected to a higher power. How are we connected to a higher power? Maybe it radiates down on us.
Yeah.
Maybe it radiates from us. And so, spirituality to me is in the fourth word in mental, emotional, spiritual, and
Mm,
physical. And none of those are real because they're all part of the process.
mm,
It's the thing.
yeah.
I give you a word to break it down into a
Yeah.
portion,
Yeah.
but it's process. Like we said, there's no definitive separation from your emotional state and your mental state. They flow from one to another.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
helpful for us to say, hey, your mental abilities of imagery, of identity, of memory, we can get a little more specific in appreciating it. This, whatever you want to call it. You want to call it God? It's God.
Yeah.
All of it.
Yeah.
You want to call it reality? Sure, reality. Let's give it some definitions. Whatever, source intelligence, fine. And I think most texts come to the same notion. This is what the vast majority of biospirituality that I think is awakening on the planet is saying. Okay, some of these religions have some very bad ideas, but what they still have within it is do not fear. There is, call it, this grand divine
Mm,
energy that courses through all, and physics is trying to find a unifying theory for all the forces
yeah.
that they came up with.
And that
So
we're all connected in some way. So, like this description that you've given of spirituality, is that how you would describe what you said before about the people living to 100 when you said religious without religion?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're very much so connected with their biology. They're very much so connected with, call it, a morality or a philosophy that's not written down.
Mm,
Like
yeah.
if someone gives them a moral trope from a religion, they're like, I don't know, I feel that feels wrong. Like
Mm,
there's something off about that, and
yeah.
they're comfortable with that,
Yeah.
right? They don't take in this idea of, I'll just swallow belief because more people believe in it.
Mm,
And that's what science is. It's not a popularity contest. It doesn't matter how many of us think one way or another for metabolism and this or that, or whether we think the earth is flat or we orbit the sun orbits us. Regardless of our opinion of the matter,
yeah.
there is an objective way it operates,
Mm,
right? There is an objective truth. And that's what you, as a scientist, that's the only belief you take, is that I am describing objective truth. It doesn't change tomorrow just because, I woke up thinking different. Rather, it is a way that I can go and describe, discover, and work within, right? And the more I know with it, the more I have, call it, ability to have it work for me,
Yeah.
but also then be part of it in return.
Yeah.
And this idea of like man must dominate nature, it was a very bad trope that set into consciousness that was very much so pushed. There is no dominating nature. You are part of nature and integrated within it,
Yeah.
like absolutely anything else. And the more you try and control and take a hold of it in ways in which doesn't serve the rest of it, is coming back to bite us in the ass, right? We have microplastics. It doesn't matter if you did a good job. They're now seeding, our agricultural fields from kilometers and miles away, in which had no plastics. So it's going to come back in one way or another to bite us in the ass and long-term effects. So there's a very simple notion I have for longevity, is that you cannot have A+ health in a C- environment. It's just, you are the environment. This is the idea of spirituality,
Yeah.
right? You are all one is a little bit wishy-washy, but in reality, that is another way of saying the law of conservation of mass.
Yeah.
Meaning energy is not created, destroyed. The carbon, the oxygen, the molecules, they're just recycled from one place to the other.
Yeah.
Meaning that there is a pool of shared stuff that is used to be able to give life and animate to things. And this is one very important word, animate. This is maybe a different podcast altogether, because we're going on an hour and 20 here.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I guess to wrap it up a little bit here is that the word animate has the root word anima, and it is the same for animal. And so anima is this idea that there's the life force. You want to call it the soul or something else. In biology, we can think of all the coordinating proteins that have the ability to use the DNA and so forth. You can put whatever story you want to it. But another word that, we have in our language is, incarnate. You come incarnate or reincarnate. And what's the re? Why were you saying re? Because there's carnate, karna is, I think, the exact same description of this animation that different cultures have used to describe the fact that stuff is coming to life. You're breathing life into the stuff. And so you are the universe, not in terms of the same sheer of quantity, but you are the universe in terms of quality. Like you are what's going, like this is what the universe is all about.
Yeah.
You coming and self-actualizing, becoming, call it, aware of yourself to an extent that's not the animal, right? Like knowing the biology is beautiful. That's one of my favorite things, but you are something outside of, outside's wrong. That's, not outside or inside, you are it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
This condensing of self-awareness, and coming to a practice where, okay, I am having all these emotions, I'm having all these feelings. They're attempting to guide you to your spiritual alignments, what you came here to do. And I think all these call it difficulties are when you've gone so far away from your chosen path. I say chosen in a very high level video game, whatever, movie style, where before the organism even fully came as an adult, it had this predisposition. Me as a 2-year-old, I went to go touch a dog's nose. I have a picture of it, or like I'm in diapers, and I'm fascinated with dogs.
Yeah.
So that's not every kid.
Yeah.
Every kid comes a little differently. So there's a path in which now is sort of put before us. And if I fight that feeling, if I fight these emotions constantly, it's me ignoring my calling, right? My purpose. And it's super important for longevity, for health, for you to have a very clear purpose that'll pull you through hard times. Purpose will pull you through the most devastating of events, so that you can come back to it the next day without this, victimhood or this collapse where you say, well, I came here to do this, right? I came here to study the human being, the human organism, the vessel, from however old I may be. Maybe I'm a consciousness I'm not getting into storytelling, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is, I think it's very important. It's important to have a purpose that's going to pull you through.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it doesn't have to be, call it, Nobel Prize, groundbreaking, Nikola Tesla style purpose. Where when I look at centurions, a lady that weaves baskets for her community, is 107. She wakes up and she weaves baskets.
Yeah.
People love her baskets. They're useful.
Yeah.
Baskets wear out and you need more baskets.
Yeah.
And so her skill is something that is part of her connection to everyone else. And that's a phenomenal purpose. It's a beautiful purpose, because you still have to serve the flesh. like it's still very much so important, where don't neglect it. A part of my life as being an intellect was, oh, I don't really care what I look like on this. And then I was like, wait, no, wait a minute. This is it. Like, this is what it's about.
Yeah.
I do care about it,
Yeah.
do love it, do take time, appreciate it.
Mm.
And if you do a good enough job with yourself, you'll have a little extra for someone else who deserves it.
Yeah. I
Right.
liked the word you used about useful. Like, I think, again, how I talked about, like, we've kind of come into like these silos of our lives almost. Like, you can just live in this silo separate from everyone else, when in reality, if we are all connected and we are like, each of us attempts in our life to be useful, to serve each other, to serve everything around us, because it's essentially us, right? Just another part of us. Um, then it's like, okay, so what I was thinking of when you were describing this is almost like water, right? Like, if you have like a big like tank of water, and you go like this and you shake it around, and there's like a wave, right? Like, it can go up, and it can like get to a point where it's very, high above all of the rest of the water, but eventually it's going to come back down and it's going to level. And it's like, when you were describing about like humans trying to elevate themselves above nature, like dominate nature, it's like, you can't dominate it, you are it. And like, you're like, yeah, okay, fine, you're gonna, at some point, you're gonna get to the top of this wave, but naturally it will all settle and go back to the point where you are simply part of that whole. And I really resonate a lot with a lot of what you're saying.
I think this is something that's on the forefront where everyone's call it ideas that float around. And I do think having a structure which to operate, that's why, I don't claim to say my definition or the way I use spirituality is the end all be all,
Hmm.
but I'm attempting to give a baseline. So when you communicate to me, I have an idea of what you're talking about,
Yeah.
that you can bring it back to the right, call it silo. Otherwise, we're wasting time in a sense where where it's like we're throwing darts. You're making noise. I have no idea what you're referring to. I'm making noise. You have no idea what I'm referring to. So let's come to a consensus so that we can approximate very complicated ideas of love. You say the word love. I have no idea what you mean,
Yeah.
right? I have a very probably different experience of love than you do, but considering you got an Italian background, I think it'd be pretty similar, right? I'm just across the Adriatic. We're outgoing, we're warm, we're social. We like to sit at cafes, we like to make fun and banter, right? So I think we have a similar idea of what that means. But
Yeah.
this is the notion of, hey, let's build upon a framework, and language for human beings is a must. Like, nutrition's one thing, and we're the only animal on this planet where substance is not enough to keep us fed. Like, we must have words
Mm,
in order to keep us,
interesting.
call it, healthy.
Yeah, that's super. What's crazy? I never thought about it like that, but you're so right. Like, when people are lonely, like if they're separated, it's like your health deteriorates. And man, that is such a good point. Like, well, first of all, we're not going to go down this rabbit hole because we don't have time, but like, I'm on this, like, this kick right now where I'm learning about like telepathy between like animals and people and all of this stuff. And so I think animals probably get that communication through some form of telepathy, but it is really interesting to look at humans who don't have that capability. That you're right, it's kind of like we have this need to like talk to other people. It's like words are almost like a form of like nutrition. It's kind of
Yeah.
crazy. I never thought about it like that. Yeah. um Daniel, this conversation could probably go on for 3 more hours if we let it. But if anybody listening wants to connect with you or wants to be a part of what you had mentioned before that you offer, how can they connect with you?
Yeah. So in Timeline Sciences, right? That's the name of the company. Timelines. We have one timeline we're sharing. You got to know your timeline you're on, and you use science to describe it. So timelinesciences.com. That is the best way to get in contact with me. My services are not updated. I do need my website to be redone. That was my initial put forward.
Okay.
So you won't see it very easily listed. Maybe you do by the time this is posted. I'm the scientist guy, so I'll have my colleagues be able to do some help here to revamp the business front. But an easy sign up is the Immortal Hub. Immortal is the fact that what you leave behind is what's going to be immortal, and you want to live a quality life. So it's a group coaching call, or a group call it alignment masterclass in terms of mindset and health. If that's something that resonates with individuals. Otherwise, obviously the one-on-ones, or I do the heavy duty bioanalytics.
Mm.
People have blood tests, people have molecular data. That's,
Mm.
they call it bread and butter of what I've been doing.
Okay.
So timelinesciences.com. Otherwise, I'm on Twitter. If you message me, I will respond. I'm not active on it,
Okay.
but that's just another, call it, hey, social media. That's not as, call it, intimidating as going on to a website.
Sure.
But it's just me. I'm a solo man, solopreneur. So if you do a contact, you'll get contact with me directly. And I'm more than happy to, put you in the right direction, or carve out something personalized. That has been the goal the entire time, is to be able to cast a wide net so that I learn the most, right? From people that have had lupus, from people that have cancer. And when you work with individuals and you go through how they have succeeded, you end up learning a lot more than, call it, trying to put people into silos, saying you do this and let's have this outcome, when, that's not necessarily the best route for that individual, nor is that something that they wish to participate in. So happy to meet people middle ground and connect them with information that's important to them. And then obviously do the process that I love, is getting to know the individual, right? Getting to know the biology, and call it the spirit or the soul behind the person piloting the biology. It was an absolute blast.
Yeah, Daniel, seriously, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure here. I think like you said, we can easily go for another hour and a half, but
all right,
let's cut it off there.
Yeah, thanks again. So again, for anybody listening, timelinesciences.com, best way to contact Daniel. And yeah, man, I'll talk to you later. Thanks for being here. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or share it with someone who'd appreciate it. For everything I have to offer, visit howtobeaperson.co.